Hello, everyone. My name is Lon, and I'm a vintage story chisel addict. And I think one of these days we're really going to have to create a support group to get over the addiction. But until then, I wanted to share some of the ways glass can get used when chiseling. Now, I'm not the first to use glass when chiseling, or even the one who discovered a lot of these properties, but I do use it a lot in my builds. And I wanted to share some of the different ways that I've been using it or I've seen others use it, because I think it can add a lot to various vintage story builds. Now, the first thing to know about glass is that only the edges that touch air render, and that creates several different useful properties or annoying properties, depending on your perspective. And I advise practicing how to use glass on a creative world, since it can get really frustrating to fix mistakes, and they're going to happen along the way. So, you're going to need patience with yourself. But this really is the hardest part when chiseling with glass. Now, that being said, let's talk about some glass properties. Okay, the first property we're going to talk about is that glass can become invisible. For instance, if we place some glass here, colored piece, regular piece of glass, and you look from the side, the blue completely disappeared. And if you bury glass with another glass, it's like it doesn't even exist anymore. All right. Okay, the second trait is that glass can be multiplied or halved. And what I mean by that is, let's say for instance, we take two pieces of glass. You can see here the color is stronger with more layers. As long as there's air between, it gets darker. And the opposite is true as well. If we put block here, this one is actually a little bit lighter blue than this one. I know it could be a little hard to see. It'd be easier to catch, let's say, one of these darker colors. So you can see here, color is different depending if it's up against a solid block or not. Next, glass has some opaqueness to it. What I mean by that is that as you add more and more layers, it's going to become harder and harder to see through it. Now, all the colored glasses have about 30% opaqueness, which means you're going to need about, this is 6 layers here to make it, quite hard to see through. But the other glasses have a different amount of opaqueness. So regular glass, it used to be 10%, but on the current update, 1.22, it's at 20%. So you see here, it takes a few more layers than the colored glasses. But you have other options as well that are more opaque than these. For instance, the quartz glass. The texture kind of adds up, but it is more opaque. And then lake glass is very effective if you need something opaque quickly, 3 layers, or glacier ice, 2, and you can't see through it at all. So on the flip side, the more opaque the glass, the more it can be affected by lighting. So I have in my hand a regular lantern and then a red lighted lantern. And if I come up here to the regular glass, you can see between no lantern and lantern, there is a difference. So the glass itself does light up a bit. And then if I do the same here with quartz glass, again, the effect is there, but a little more pronounced because it's a bit more opaque. Now I could try this again, switching between the red and regular, and you can see that there is a bit of a color difference, and it's again slightly more noticeable when doing it on the quartz glass. And this leads me to a strongly related property. Okay, what I mean when I say glass has skew, it's talking about that the glass faces are going to be different depending on the direction they are facing. So, for For instance, here, there's always going to be a little bit of a difference in the faces. You can see this one's a little brighter, and this one's brighter here. And it actually has to deal with the ambient light. So my moon's over there, and my sun's there. So you can see here the faces facing them would be a little bit brighter than the other ones. And this effect is incredibly hard to completely control, even if it's indoors. The ambient light is going to make a big difference depending where your sun is. And also, you can't control someone's going to come up with a lantern in their hand and kind of affect how it looks. So I call having to deal with these little side color differences, I say that those side colors are the skew. So when I come in here, I say this has a block of skew because I'm looking this direction and it's 1 block thick. But if we add another layer, I'd say this is 2 blocks of skew. So I'm looking this way and I need to affect for the color difference on that depth of 2 blocks. So note that all of these properties are true even when the glass is chiseled. So for instance, let's say I come here and I chisel this glass. Well, I can make more layers with it, make it more opaque, taking out a bit of the center. You see, that property is still true. Or I could even add in, a different color, put it in there, and again, looking at the direction, it disappears. So all of these properties stay true. So how then can we use them to create art in Vintage Story? Well, I'm going to go over 6 different techniques using these different properties. Now, again, this isn't meant to be comprehensive of every way you can use glass in Vintage Story, but it just serves as a good way to start planning or evaluating different glass pieces you see in Vintage Story, as well as giving a shared language between different creators in the space. So, that being said, let's start by looking at the very first technique. So the first technique we're going to go over is tinting. So let's say we want a very specific color. Let's say like andesite is the closest color to it, but we need it slightly bluer. So if we add a little blue in here, it just tints slightly bluer that way. Here we can see an example of tinting being used to create multicolored tiles in this backsplash here. Okay, let's say we want to create some new colors. Well, we can do that through blending. For instance, if we take this yellow plus red, now we got this new kind of orange. And we call this a paired pane. And it's a paired pane because it has one color on one side and another color on the other. If it's just a single color on both sides, for instance, this is just a pane or a single pane. The thickness makes no difference. And even in fact, if you have another color in the middle, it's still a paired pane because that end color is the same. It's purely on what sides touch air. Here we have a piece called Serif Pop Art, and it uses blending in a single paired pane to try to create a subtle bendy dot effect. So texture is when you're purposely using an uneven glass surface for some kind of wanted effect. For instance, if you need something just a little bit that's less than 1 pixel difference, putting it on a different level can add that in sometimes. Or you need a transition color. Depending on the angle, you can get that little bit of in-between color. So here we see a piece that's endeavoring to mimic Picasso's painting style, and it's endeavoring to do that through heavy use of texturing. You see here that the texturing is adding multiple different colors in very close succession, as well as giving a sense of overall movement to the piece. So layering is when you use multiple panes or layers. For instance, I have here a paired plane of red and yellow, and I'm creating this new orange color. And if I add more layers to it, it creates a stronger version of that color. Now we could also create new colors that you can't get, like very complex colors. Here we're going to add in a little red, a little green, a little blue, and we're creating a brand new unique color. Now, orange can also be created, here's red, yellow, but if I can switch the order here to yellow, red, again, add more layers to create a stronger color. And it's very useful. You see it's the same color. But you should note that because of the ambient light effect, these colors might change on you over time a bit. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for instance, I set so that the sun is behind us. Well, now the face that's facing the sun is going to get a little bit of a stronger color boost on these paired panes, especially when there are multiple layers. It's not going to be as apparent when you're only with one. See here, it's still, an orange color, but with more layers, the slight color difference effect is more noticeable. Again, let's say I switch the time so it's now the sun's on the other side. You can see here, now the color has switched sides. So that can be very useful in making these strong colors, but just note that they might shift on you a little bit as time goes on, depending on how many layers you have. But you can also use layering to create more and more, opaqueness to parts in your piece. So for instance, here I have quartz and red. I have red and quartz, and I can get a little bit more opacity to it. And again, if I want to change the time, well, the effect might be a little stronger again when you start adding more opaque values to your piece. It becomes a little bit, again, more noticeable. People are walking up to the piece with a lantern. Those higher opaque values are going to pop out a little bit more when you're layering. But it's still a very powerful technique. Again, you're using it to create these new colors, these stronger colors that pop. And again, you can use it to create the opaqueness or a sense of depth. Just be aware that the colors might shift a little bit on you as your day goes on. So let's see some examples. We can see here a paper screen, and it uses two layers of high opaque glass, in this case quartz and lake ice, to balance letting light through while blocking the view. So for softening and darkening, the art is mostly defined by the solid blocks in the piece, but glass is added to either tint pixels, soften the color differences between the different pixels, or to darken a pixel. So for instance, let's take this chiseled block that has different gray tones. If we want to make the difference between the gray tones less pronounced, we can add in some glass. In this case, we're adding also the blue tint. But it just makes that difference not quite as noticeable. And the other thing you can do is we can darken it. So let's say, for instance, we want to darken along this line. Well, if it goes in an extra pixel and we add back in the glass, it just darkens it a little further. And you can see here, now it's pretty close to that basalt value. So you can create a lot of different shades this way to the solid base. So let's look at an example. This rooster's Chinese painting is using glass to both soften and darken at points, and it's creating a lot of different subtle shades off the base painting of chalk and basalt. So, directionality is a technique where you're purposely trying to use the invisibility property of glass to hide parts from certain player perspectives. So, for instance, if we come in here, we can add in our blue, and then it disappears from over here, and depending, I get it just right. And then you can put in another kind of painting on this side, and they kind of disappear at different perspectives. So let's show an example using directionality. So this is the color changing cube, and it wants players to interact with it. And it does that by changing colors depending on where you're looking at it from. Actually has quite a few colors just by varying 3 types of glass in these miniature cubes. So that is 6 techniques you can use when creating glass art. Again, this isn't meant to be comprehensive. For instance, using lighting or trying to create 3D art that's visible no matter the angle, and I'm sure much more. There's really no cap to creativity in this game. But now we're going to look at some common examples of glass art. Again, not a comprehensive list, just a way to get some creative ideas flowing. Most players are going to get started playing with glass to create stained glass and stained leaded glass windows. And it's a great place to start. It uses solid pixels to create a pattern or design and glass to give it color. So here's one example, Beauty and the Beast Rose window, a single layer glass that uses a lot of ice. And then we have several here from CD Minor, who's really been pushing the envelope on what you can do in this media. He uses this one for creating multiple unique colors, and this one to play with light and opaqueness. Painted glass and stained glass are related, except painted glass uses multiple glass colors to create a design between the solid blocks. So, for instance, we have this Victorian painted window, and it uses a single paired pane, or this one from September. Gorgeous. Glass paintings are chiseled paintings that use glass to help create the picture. These pictures can be made mostly by the glass or mostly from the solid blocks in the piece. For instance, I would call this one a glass dominant painting. It's a version of Impressionist Sunrise by Monet. That is because the picture is mostly conveyed through the glass. Now, this one would be a solid dominant picture because again it is the solid blocks that convey most of the shapes in the piece. Here are some other examples. We have another beautiful painting from September, and then here is another Monet water lilies. So holographic pieces and glass sculptures are basically trying to use the properties of glass for 3D effects. For instance, we have this DNA sculpture here that wants to be readable from all perspectives, as well as this edition by Sackgut that is adding a little bit of glass to give a 3D dimensionality to the underlying painting. Anyway, I hope this helps make glass more accessible to more vintage story artists out there. I personally would love to see everyone's creations. So give it a try and post what you make on the builds forum at vintagestory.at. All right, thank you for your time. Bye, everyone.